Yes, basically the fundamental aspect of what art is it is a concretization of some particular philosophy. So the justification for this is they, bat down a couple of other theories of art, and then we get to this, right? It is, we have to have, in every single choice we make, that is all based on a very, very, very broad field of metaphysics and epistemology and then your ethics, right? That is all a whole host of ideas in there, very, very abstract. You can't have all of these abstractions continually operative in your mind, and yet you require for them to be continually operative for you to make the correct choice. So what art is doing is it takes all of these abstracts, all of these concepts, and it distills them down into a single percept, one thing that you can just immediately see and go, yes, I understand now. So instead of me thinking through a whole chain of deduction from the metaphysics, existence exists, all the way through the epistemology, how do I know things, all the way down into the ethics, to decide which color of ice cream I want to get, right? I can just say, what would Howard Rourke do? And then I just know what I should do in that situation, because there's a concrete form of the ideal man in a Howard Rourke. So, given this, there are basically two ways that you can analyze a piece of art on the objectivist view. You analyze it, and both ways are required for a complete and total objective analysis of the art. You analyze the philosophy that it embodies, and you analyze the actual aesthetic values that it has. So, aesthetic values, there is such a thing as objective aesthetic principles, because art is an actual thing with an actual purpose. Its purpose is to concretize some particular philosophy. So there are a few different ones you could give. Peikoff gives 3 in his Opar. The first is selectivity. You have to be very, very selective. You have to be judicious with respect to what your subject is, what you're going to depict. Right? You can't just depict any random thing, because any random thing is not going to be good at concretizing your philosophy. Right? Given that the yes, so you can't choose as your subject just whatever comes along or whatever I remember from my adolescence, and since it's your own perspective, right? It can't be whatever other people like, whatever the critics approve of. These things can't work, right? They're objectively poor, just on a pure aesthetic level. And the second principle is clarity. You have to be clear with what you're depicting, because any fuzzy line, any sort of blurred ambiguity type of thing, you're not going to be able to bring this up into focus. It's, by definition, if it's blurry, if you can't make out what it's actually saying, it's out of focus. You couldn't make it into focus, right? So that is another objective principle for objectively good art. And then the third one is like the hallmark of art. It was called by Ayn Rand, and that is integration. So every little bit has to be completely integrated with every other one. Every piece has to imply the rest and be implied by the rest. So you can't have the justification for this, the validation of this, would be that if you had some art piece where it didn't have a complete integration, it was like, the style it was in was very, very clear, very, very, proper lines and everything. Everything looked like it should in a universe where A is A, and then what it's concretizing is a Heraclitean metaphysics that is not integrated, it's disintegrated. You have essentially two pieces of art there, which are combined into one, and you can't separate them out, and this completely muddles the whole process, because you're supposed to be focusing on one single concrete, so that you can bring it into focus and know what choice to make. So any sort of disintegration, it completely destroys this. You're supposed to be making a new, selectively chosen reality. Any point which is out of place, immediately your focus goes towards it, and it destroys the rest. The entire process is demolished by having disintegrated art.
I think any sort of dissonance that someone might have on hearing, like the fact that art can be objective for the first time, is the fact that nobody in our culture ever defines art. Like, art is taken as whatever you want it to be. Everything's art. Anything, like, your art is as good as mine. We can't, like, it's all subjective. If you think it's good, then it's good for you. So we've got this whole mess of different fields of painting, of sculpture, movies, and nobody ever gives a definition or any principles to what is actually going on here. What is the basis of all this? What are we trying to achieve with this? And because nobody ever answers those questions, we don't have a means of actually judging stuff. We can't say what is good, like, how good is this better than that, because we don't have a basis. We don't have a standard to judge it against. So that's why Ayn Rand is coming across as very much a rebel in this culture, because she is giving, like, us a clear definition and a clear purpose of what this thing actually is. And according to that purpose, we can start understanding, like, even beyond what makes something good art, like, how do humans process art? That's a whole nother, like, science, is how do we process music in our own brains? And that's another, like, human nature thing, is because humans process music in a certain way, that makes some musical techniques better than others. So it's a vastly unexplored field.
Very profoundly said there. I myself, up until this point, have heard almost two, I've had almost two polar opposite, impressions of how, Objectivism approaches the creative aspect. And, as we all know, creativity is absolutely, essential to, any, capitalist system, for example, in any, market, depends on that. Basically, what I've heard is I've had one sense where, it almost seems like a very liberating concept, the way she approaches art. But I've also had other notions, for example, where I have seen, not from myself, but from outside forms of media, portraying, certain aspects of her ideology. For example, we can take A is A, for example. We know that this is, a line that refers to the law of identity. But I have seen, certain sources try to pose this as, A is A, and that's it. You can't really imagine anything beyond A. So if you start thinking, like, let's say I look at A and I see different, potential capabilities to this concept. No, somebody might say, the objectivist would step in and say, no, A is strictly A. You can't, see beyond that. You have to take it only for what it is. And I thought, what faster way to, suppress the concept of imagination or any, free thinking than that. But basically, this kind of leads me to another idea of what I was thinking. So basically, in Objectivism, we have this, we have existence, the external, and we have the consciousness, which is internal. But basically, where I'm going with this concept is, what exactly would your response be to people who try to, who try to present this objectivist view on art as something that is, censorious, trying to, push people into a corner, for example, because, for example, if you tell people that, there is one correct way to present art, and that everything else is incorrect, some people do tend to dig their heels in. So how would you respond to them in that case? How would you, defend Objectivism?
Well, there's a couple of different things here, so let's take one at a time. I'll leave on the table for now, like, it's like there's only one right way to do it. So let's get back to that. First of all, the idea of what was it? It's completely slipped my mind. Do you have something to say, Zulu, as I try to remember?
So basically this idea is, like, well, there's only this one way to do it, and that's being, it's stifling art. So what the objectivist is saying fundamentally here is that, well, when you're doing art, you're doing actually something. You're doing something with an actual objective purpose here. You have a wide array of things you can do. You are not depicting reality as it is. You're not depicting A as A. You're depicting the potential in reality. This is the fundamental thing. I think Aristotle called art more of a science than history for this reason. Like, you're depicting things as they could be, as they should be. That is what you're doing when you're doing art. So what you're doing is you're picking out those aspects of reality that are metaphysically important. This is what you're doing. So in this selection, your selection could either be irrelevant, dumb, it doesn't actually depict anything, it is, depicting a false philosophy. These are all possibilities that you could run into. So there are real objective standards for art, but that doesn't mean that you have to just depict things like a slice of life. No, that's not how things really are. This is a nonsense suggestion. Whenever you hear anybody say they're watching some detective show and they say, well, that's pretty unrealistic, they would be solving all these crimes, or they're watching House MD, it's like, that's pretty unrealistic, he shouldn't be this genius. Well, no, it's not depicting things as they actually are, it's depicting things as they could be. It's depicting the potential of man to be brilliant. That's what it is doing, fundamentally. And this is what great art is about. It's about picking out every aspect of reality that you should be having operative in your mind. It has to cull a lot of reality in this sense. So art is fundamentally not realistic on the Objectivist view. If art is realistic, then you aren't actually cutting through the ambiguity of reality. That's the job of the artist. He's supposed to cut away this ambiguity and leave you with something that you can directly perceive and get exactly what you need from it. So it's objectively bad if you're doing this ambiguous, it's just some slice of life, it's just things as they really are. That's journalism, not art.
Yes, so that got me back on mental track. It's really, the problem here is an equivocation. We're using two different definitions of the term realistic. So on one hand, we've got realistic meaning you paint the mountain exactly as you see it, with no variation, no creative framing there. It's almost like a photograph. Like, this is a real movement of artists. People try and paint things very photographically. So that's one definition of the word realism. But how Objectivists used realism is under the term romantic realism. So it's reality as it is metaphysically. Like, this goes back to the metaphysics of Aristotle versus Plato. So on Plato's view, we've got a world of forms. We've got the ideal is in another universe, and everything on Earth is just like a dim shadow of that. So like a Platonist artist would try and present the ideal, but it would be very much like desolate, like it would be almost alien to us because we can't actually see the ideal. It's inaccessible on Earth. We can only contemplate it privately. But the Aristotelian, the Objectivist artist, would recognize that the universals, the forms that Plato thinks are in another universe, they're actually concepts. So they're what is common between elements. So if, like, one example, this could be an argument. So you watch a movie and there's an argument between the parents, and this is very dramatic and moves the plot forward. But how do you actually portray this argument? One way you could do it is you could observe. You could go to your friend's house and listen to parents there have an argument and write everything down and say, okay, I'm going to put this in my movie. This is what an argument is. This is realistic. But what the Aristotelian would do he would take a bunch of arguments from either his own past or what he observes, and he would figure out what is essential about an argument. Like, what is essential and what is just incidental? What are those aspects that are present in various arguments but aren't in common, aren't the essence of what an argument is? And he would separate those out. And in the end, what he would portray in his movie is the pure form of the argument, as Plato would put it, or as an Aristotelian would put it, the universal argument. What an argument is without all the noise or the distractions. And you need some incidentals. Like since there isn't a pure form, you can't get rid of all of the incidental factors, but you can keep the incidental factors that sort of frame the concept well. So you need some sort of frame, but you choose the frame in order to highlight the universal and not in order to obscure it.
Okay. In that case, I'm kind of curious, based off of what you're saying here, what the basis would be of more abstract forms of art, for example, things that might not, might have little to no bearing on our objective world as it currently exists. To cite one particular example, I know that there was a band back in the 80s called the Talking Heads, and they had a famous slogan for a while. I think they even had a documentary by this name that was called "Stop Making Sense." And I'm kind of curious, how that would fit in with objectivism if we have this, movement here that's openly calls for creativity to be built on this principle of where not everything has to make sense or not everything has to fit together. What would the objectivist, response be to that, for example?
Yeah, so these people will be doing objectively poor art. The point of art is to concretize. It's to show man what some sort of concrete that he can guide his life with, right? Any sort of ambiguity movement in art, they're fundamentally against the very purpose of art in the first place. It's an anti-concept almost. We see this with Jackson Pollock, where he just has random paints splashed on a canvas, right? What exactly is that saying? I can't tell what exactly this means. And this is all in the wave of the post-Duchamp. I can't remember his first name. Duchamp, he's the guy who made like the urinal, and it's like, this is art or whatever, everything after that is just art is whatever you want it to be. It doesn't have an objective purpose. We can just do whatever the hell we want, right? This is ignoring the fact that, no, you are actually doing something. You are doing something particular, and you can't just depict art by whatever means. So, some sort of artist. Ayn Rand has a good quote about this, where she's discussing the movie Siegfried, which embodies a philosophy she disagrees with, but reportedly on the door of the director's office, there hung a thing where it said that nothing in this movie is accidental, and she said that is the motto of great art, where everything is chosen, everything is decided upon. Like this guy, he like literally handcrafted every branch on every tree that was in the movie. Like there was nothing out of place. That is brilliant art, just objectively on an aesthetic level. When you have this sort of movement of, oh, just whatever, just throw everything at the wall, don't even bother to see what sticks, just throw it at the wall, and that's the art, right? It's almost as if they are dispensing with the art itself. We see this with like the banana taped to the wall, where it's like the story behind it is more important than the actual art, because they replace that banana like every week or something, so it doesn't rot there. They don't give a shit when some guy goes up and eats the banana, and that's more performance art, right? Because then they just go up and tape another banana. All they care about is the authenticity certificate, that they are the ones with the actual story behind it. The art itself is completely meaningless. So it's no wonder that people are turning to AI tools now, to make actually good art.
Yeah, and beyond so-called modern art, another error which goes against rationality is just like not thinking it through, because an error that some conservatives make, especially like the anti-feminist YouTubers, is they say, get politics out of video games or something. Like, this has nothing to do, this isn't political, this isn't ideological, this is just like a hobby. But everyone who has played like a great video game knows that there's a story there, there is art there. Like, you have to make conscious decisions, and even if it's just like a simple game, you've got to structure things according to the principles of art. And when you refrain from doing so, when you just sort of like put stuff there without thinking about it, that doesn't mean that that it's value free all of a sudden. That means the values that are there are implicit. So instead of getting like a well-shaped, very precise final product where everything is where it should be and everything is like revolves around one idea. What you end up getting is a hodgepodge. You get a patchwork, a Frankenstein's monster, amalgamation of all of the unquestioned premises that you believe in, but you don't even realize it, because the stuff doesn't happen randomly, and it doesn't happen without cause. Like, again, going back to the fundamental principles. And because those two things are true, anything you, like if you're writing a story, every word you put in that story has a cause, and its cause is because you put it there. And you put it there because you have a premise or a value system or a belief that leads you to thinking that this is important in a story. But if you didn't think about it, then you haven't determined whether that's correct or not, whether your premise was right. And if your premise is wrong, that's when you get bad results.